The trick is, making sure that it actually has an impact. And, once, we can talk more about strategy and coordinated strategies later, but the trick is really knowing how to write a good letter, and making sure that you capture the person's attention, because no matter who you write to, whether it's the U.S. senator or the president or your local city town council person, you want to catch their attention. You want them to pay attention to what you say. So it's great to send a letter, but ultimately, especially for your mission, your group's mission, you want it to have an impact. You want them to actually do something. And so oftentimes that will mean, having a more coordinated strategy with other letter writers, but also just making sure that your letter actually really catches somebody's attention. For example, I remember I had a student who worked for one of the senators from California, and this was about 15 years ago. But she was going through constituent letters, and she had a letter from a farmer, and it was all about how the bees in California were dying. And, this was before people were really paying attention to this. And so because of the letter that farmer wrote, the senators, had hearings on Capitol Hill, and they started doing research and investigating this. And so if you write a letter in the right way, you can have a big impact. So Christy, if you want to put my slides up. So what I'm teaching you is what I've learned from professional political consultants. And so what I mean by that is I've had lots of friends and people that I've worked with over the past 20 years and longer. And what they've taught me about what's called messaging. I mean, that's really what you're doing. And whether you're running a political campaign or you're writing a letter, what I'm trying to teach you is the art of persuasion. And so these techniques can work in any number of settings. And so it's not just about convincing, a U.S. senator to pay attention to your letter, or your state legislator. If you're trying to convince your parents to, give you the car on Saturday night, it's the same kind of principles. Okay, so these rules can apply in a lot of different situations. And so think about this. This is sort of the art of persuasion more than anything else. And I'm really happy to say, when I was in college, I worked on tons of political campaigns. I worked for all kinds of candidates, and they all lost, which is why I decided to pursue a different career. But I still have always kept my, at least one toe in the political pool. And like I said, I have a lot of friends who do this for a living. So I've been really, really fortunate to be able to learn from the best. And so rule number one about messaging, and I say rule number one, and I mean that in every sense of the word, it's the only rule, okay? And that's when you're writing your letter to whoever it is, it's really about telling your story. It's about telling a story that makes that emotional connection. You are literally grabbing that person by the heart. And getting them to pay attention and making your story compelling. And so that's it in a nutshell. It's telling your story. So next slide, please. So what do I mean by messaging and a message? And so an effective message just explains why people should care about your issue. That's it in a nutshell. And an effective message, as I said, tells your story. And I don't mean to diminish it in any way by calling it a story, but because that's really important. You want to paint a picture in people's heads. You want people to be able to envision something as they're reading your letter. And so it sounds simple, and it kind of is, but it's not, because we tend to feel like, oh, we have to sound authoritative and we have to sound like we're an expert. And no, you don't. Leave that to the experts. But it's about telling your story. All right, next slide. So, and here's the thing, the more personal your story is, the better it will be. And what I mean by personal is I don't mean like, dear diary, today he looked at me across the room and, no. Like no Alanis Morissette songs, like nothing like that. So the more personal it is, the better. And what I mean by personal is nobody else can tell that story. That story is unique to you, and nobody else can tell it. And the better it will be. And so the idea is, again, you're painting a picture in people's heads. And you're doing that by providing details. Sometimes it's the smallest little things. It's just a phrase or a sentence that you use that will make the light bulb go on and the heart engage. And so it's literally, just going through and describing things in a way that evokes an image in people's heads. And I'm obsessed with SpongeBob, so I had to use that little picture of him. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so I hope you guys can read this. Like, I've got everybody's video on the right side of my screen. So I'm going to read this to you. And this is an example describing a major scientific discovery. I wanted to give you an example of kind of what I mean so you can get an idea. So this is one way of describing a major scientific discovery, okay? So scientists at CERN in Switzerland made a highly important discovery: the confirmation of a particle that had been proposed theoretically decades earlier. Scientists observed a new particle in the mass region around 125 GV. I have to admit, I don't even know how to say that. This particle is consistent with the Higgs boson, but it will take further work to determine whether or not it is the particle predicted by the standard model. So all completely accurate. Can you go back? So all completely accurate, right? This is a very sort of journalistic account. It's very in-depth. But by the time you get to the end, I'm snoring, okay? Like, what is this? Like, what is 125 GV? What's the standard model? It's Higgs boson. It's full of all this jargon. And so, by the time you get to the end, you've lost your audience, right? Okay, so now, next slide, please. So here's a slightly different version. Same exact topic, explaining the same exact thing, but a little differently. Scientists at CERN in Switzerland broke out the champagne and hugged one another in celebration. They had discovered something whose possible existence had tantalized them for decades: the elusive Higgs boson, known as the God particle. Whoa! Like, wow, tell me more. Like, the God particle? What is that? I want to know more about this. And so to me, the most important phrase in this whole little paragraph is broke out the champagne and hugged. Because it's painting that picture. It's that little detail that really paints a picture in people's minds about what's happening and what's going on. So this paragraph is describing the exact same thing, but in a very different way that's going to that tells a story in a way that's understandable and unique and interesting and exciting. So, that's what you need to do in your letter, is tell your story and share those details. And, the first time you write a letter, it's going to suck. Okay. It's just about getting your thoughts down on paper. And so a really good letter is going to take a couple of drafts. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be using statistics and numbers. Those are important. But it's how you frame them. It's the context that you put them in that is going to make it the most effective in terms of how you use those numbers and statistics. Don't forget, and I know I've said this over and over, but it's about telling your story and why you care about the issue you do and how it has affected you personally. So that's all I've got. If people have questions or if they want to talk a little bit more about, the process, I can do what I can.
I had a really quick question. When we're talking about writing letters, I wanted to get your opinion on what's been kind of circulating a lot is kind of pre-made templates, and you just kind of sign your name at the bottom. I'm not sure how effective those are. I wanted to get your opinion on the effectiveness of those.
That would be a great question to ask Jack, but here's my sense of that. If you want someone to read your letter and sort of tally it, but not actually have an impact, then do the template. If you want a legislator or a staff member to actually pay attention to your letter, then don't do a template. you're going to be submitting your letters via email. And you have to remember that, the staff people who work for legislators and decision makers get overwhelmed with emails. And so a template is just not going to get the kind of attention that something that is personal is going to get. Because again, if you took the bottom line is, if you took the time to write a personal letter, that right there is going to get you someone's attention. Whereas if you're just signing a template and hitting send, what will probably happen is you will be part of a tally. Like, let's say, Congress is considering some immigration reform, and they're getting all of these templates that a particular organization has produced for people to sign their names to and send. What will happen, like, let's say they're getting hundreds, maybe even thousands of those templates. They'll keep track. They're going to keep a tally mark of how many pro and anti letters they got. And that's important information, and it's important to be a part of that. But if you want to actually influence policy, to shape the policy, to engage with that staff member or the person who's reading the letter, then a personal letter is going to be far more effective.
Hey gang, I have some good news. I have Jack on the phone. So
Yay!
they're having some internet issues, but he was able to call in. So I want to test it out and see if you all can hear him. And then we can keep answering some questions here, and then we'll turn it over to Jack then. Jack, do you want to talk and see if we can hear?
I can't not apologize more for not being with you directly on a Zoom. As remote as that is, this seems almost archaic. Can you guys hear me all right?
I'm getting thumbs up. Are we doing okay? Okay. Barb, do you have more slides to go through, or?
Nope, that's it. I'm good.
I didn't want to stop you, so okay.
Nope, perfect timing.
Awesome.
Yeah. I just thought I'd spend a minute or two kind of giving you an insight. Barb is absolutely right. If you send a form letter, you're going to get at best a form response. If you want attention, you're going to have to attention to your issue, whatever it happens to be. You're going to have to up your game a little bit to get the attention of the staff in the office who, as Barb said a little bit ago, are overwhelmed. The volume of information that comes into a congressional office is staggering. You'll never, if you ever have a chance to go to work in any of them, Republican or Democrat, House or Senate, State House or federal, you will never have access to as much information anytime in the rest of your life as you will during that period of time when you're in a congressional office or a state house office. People send everything to them. And the things that get the most attention are the personal notes, the personal emails, the personal letters. Since the crisis back in 2001 when the people were sending anthrax through the mail to the congressional offices, all the mail now goes out to Colorado and is screened. It's radiated so as to negate any adverse effect from anything that might be in there, which makes for some really funny letters because if you send anything with a plastic on it, it melts. And sometimes you open the stuff and it just all crumbles on your lap. The staff that are in the office receiving this mail are often, after a very short period of time, pretty sophisticated at knowing who has the answer to the questions that you've raised. In other words, which legislative assistant would handle this, which committees it should go to, which organizations would also have collaborative or counter information. So if you're advocating something that the member of Congress truly disbelieves in, they will have advocates on the outside that will be supplying them with information to counter your information. If the information you're sending is in support of something the member of Congress believes, then they will have advocates on the outside that will be supplying them with information supporting what you're saying. But the most the more unique your letter or email is, the more likely it is to be paid attention to. I would like to know if any of you or all of you have sent letters to executive or at the federal or state level. Have any of you sent letters so far? And I know I can't ask for a show of hands because I can't see you.
There were a few hands. Does anybody have something specific they would want to share?
Did you get what I'm curious about is, did you get responses, and were the responses in line? In other words, did they respond to your letter, or did they send you a form letter?
I can kind of share my experience. Early in March or April, I sent, it was just a template email to advocate for COVID economic relief. And I got a response from both Senators Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown. And I would say it was kind of a bit of a mix of that. It was a very formal, it was a very form response. Thank you for getting in touch with me, Shazab. These are my views. These are my views on the subject matter. Thank you for reaching out. And that was pretty much the extent of it.
And were the letters at variance with one another, or did they appear to be, even though they probably take? I think Rob and Sherrod both voted for the first two programs, the first two COVID economic stimulus programs. I think where they differed is in this most recent version that Sherrod was for it, and Rob, I think, is holding out against it. Is that about right?
Yes, earlier I was advocating directly for emergency payments directly to people, and what they were saying is that we support the one-time stimulus check, we support the unemployment bills benefits at the time, but we don't support that, and we urge you to look at the bill that we supported with whatever they had said.
And what works? Any of your other colleagues have different experiences?
I mean, yeah, I've had other friends get in touch with their representatives, both in state and out of state, and they have varied, but for the most part, they've been getting responses about most of the issues. So it's not like they really haven't ignored any of the emails or any of the messages we send out. It's just that the type of response that they give varies. That's at least from my experience.
Right.
Any other thoughts?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Anybody else have any experiences they want to share with that? Hearing back, not hearing back, anything?
Yeah. Have any of you worked in a congressional or a state representative, state senate office?
Doesn't look like it, no.
Okay. Oh, and do any of you aspire to do that?
Casey, go ahead.
Oh, so I actually did write to my state rep. It was I'm looking at it right now. It was June 11th for the Justice and Policing Act. But I did use a template and I did not hear anything back. So.
Okay.
Nick, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if there was a difference in if you go to their website and you fill out one of those letters or response forms, it's not a template by any means. You're free to write whatever comments you want versus, of course, writing a template, it doesn't sound like it's such a great idea, but versus if you actually took the time to write a letter and then sent it to the office, is there a different type of response that you should expect to get?
Well, the template, who prepares the template?
You can find them anywhere, to my knowledge. There's Twitter accounts that if you just send them your name, they'll sign your name at something and they'll send it in. You can go online and it'll have a few sentences and you just have to insert some buzzwords.
But Nick, weren't you were asking about whether or not to use the portal on the member's website, right?
Yeah, something like that, or if there was a better way to communicate with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I actually have some personal experience with this summer. It took many months for me to get my federal income tax refund, and so we have a BW alum who works in Senator Portman's DC office, and so I asked him that very question. I said, should I be trying to find who your legislative aide who deals with these issues are, or should I just submit it through the web page portal, the sort of generic boxes that you can type in your name and your message and then hit send, and you think it goes into the great ether. And at least for Portman's office, like, they do pay attention to letters submitted through their webpage, and in fact you might actually get a quicker response because they sort them relatively quickly as send them to the right legislative aide and the right staff member to get you a response. So at least for Portman's office, they do pay attention to letters that are submitted through their web page portals.
And I think Sherrod does the same thing. And I think most of the House members do the same thing as well. The volume that comes in is staggering, but they do try and personalize it as much as they can. The other thing you have to remember about a congressional office is that the legislative assistants are working on current legislation, whatever the issues of the day are. So 1 month they might be working on education. 3 months later they might be working on housing project. But they are the persons responsible for those substance areas ongoing. So the member of Congress, when they come into the office, they look at Joe or Sally and they say, Joe is my this subject area expert, and Sally's my this subject area expert. They are always those subject area experts unless there's been a major shift in the chief of staff and the member of Congress want new people to work or shift those people around. But in the meantime, there's also a group of employees almost always in the local office of the member of Congress. In other words, they're in the state as opposed to the Washington office. And their job is case management. So what they do is they help on very specific immigration issues or tax IRS issues or Social Security issues. And before they engage with the constituent, they will ask the constituent to sign a document saying, for the period of time while this is under consideration, I authorize Helen, whatever, to help me with my Social Security matter. Then when Helen calls Social Security, she's calling on behalf of the member of Congress, but she's also calling on behalf of the constituent. And you get much faster response to those matters where they're personal to the individual, that your mom is in a nursing home and can't get her Medicare properly, and those kinds of issues where the congressional office can help to intervene with the vast bureaucracy that is the executive branch. You can get a lot of stuff done, not through letter writing or not through the portal, but through the assistance of the women and the men that work in the state offices, in the congressional offices, but in the state offices.
Thanks, Jack. We had a couple people comment. Dr. Postman, who actually is teaching a great service learning class, Religion for the Citizen, one thing she has her students do is write citizen letters. And she said they just submitted them last week, and one was advocating for a Green New Deal and just got a detailed letter back from Portman's office within 3 days.
That's very fast.
Yeah. And then
it must also show the volume of mail that they're getting on that issue.
And then Dr. Green commented that she's only ever received form letter responses. And let's see. Dr. Postman says, the times I've gotten better responses have been on distinctly personal issues. My sister's adoption of my nephew was held up in Nepal when they wouldn't give a visa. And they had a campaign to get Congress to help.
Right. The fun ones are when you get a baseball player just before spring training and you can't get them out of their home country. because immigration and naturalization knows something about them that the rest of the baseball community does not yet know. Mm. And so then you get into, well, why can't so and so play ball this year? Well, because he can't get into the United States. Or, musical troops, from Asia or, Latin America, or, you get some real interesting immigration issues.
This is the behind the scenes that Jack can provide. We have a question here. It says, during non-pandemic times, are you allowed to enter the local offices in person to talk about your issue?
Yeah. The best way you can meet with a member of Congress is not in Washington. It's at their home office. They often do home office hours on Friday afternoons or Monday mornings, particularly in Ohio, because it's such a short flight back and forth to D.C. So often they'll have, twice a month, they'll meet with constituents on Monday mornings or Friday afternoons. Then you will read often about Congress being on recess. And what recess means to the rest of the world is it's free time. To a member of Congress, it often means 12-hour days in the state, in the congressional district, trying to get to and meet with all the people they haven't been able to get to and meet with over the last period of time. And, sometimes you need a vacation to have to make up for the recess because you're just exhausted. But that's the best place to meet a member of Congress. Often in the summertime, in our case, in Sherrod's office, we would send all of the legislative staff to Ohio for at least, if the summer recess in August was 4 weeks, we would insist that they come out to Ohio for 10 days and meet with all of those constituent groups out in Ohio that they would normally be working with on an ongoing basis over the telephone. Now with Zoom, you have a little bit better connection if your computer is working. But in almost all cases, we would have the legislative staff come out at least once a year for 10 days and meet with constituent groups. You can easily ask for any of them. You have Marcy Kaptur as your member of Congress, and then you have Sherrod and Rob. So ask for their legislative assistant for education or for advocacy or whatever issue areas that you'd like to have them meet with you. Have them come out and meet with you during one of the recesses. Offer to host them and bring a bunch of students together to talk with them.
That's great. Other questions that folks may have? You can put it in the chat. Let's see. Would it be more impactful for a group of people to send one large letter with multiple signatures or for multiple people to send individual letters?
Yes. The latter, frankly, and the more personalized it is, the better. If you really are writing a kind of a form letter, I would not advocate wasting the stamp price. But if it's personal, if you have a reason, for instance, if you know of people that have been impacted because of the COVID virus, that they can't work, they heretofore had worked at hotels or at restaurants or at nightclubs or at shopping malls or retail stores, and those stores have been closed or the restaurants have been closed, and they cannot work. Telling their story on a personal basis about why they need those resources and why the failure to get those resources to them is socially impactful and unconscionable, and it matters to you. Tell those stories on a personal basis. That will get a far greater response from the congressional office, and it helps the people. If you're against the next stimulus package, it helps you to understand just how many people are in dire need of those resources. If you're in favor of those continued expenditures, and I'm talking now about the unemployment supplemental, portion. If you're in favor of that, then you need that evidence to go into your Monday policy or Tuesday policy meeting with your colleagues and say, look, I'm getting 1,000 letters a week on this, and these are 1,000 different individuals in my congressional district who are not getting these supplemental benefits. They're going to lose their apartments. They're going to lose their condominiums. They're going to lose their homes. They've already lost their cars. Those stories help them become better legislators. Either way, whether they're for it or against it, by telling them the story, you help them make a better decision.
Thanks, Jack. Barb, I want to make sure we have space if there's anything you want to add. Otherwise, we have another question.
Yeah, and so just along with all of this is, you do want to keep it reasonably short. And so, the most effective way to reach these folks is going to be, online, either through the portal that they have on their webpage or by emailing them a letter. And so what I would suggest that you do when you're drafting your letter is do it on, in Word, or like on a one-page document. So you have an idea of approximately how long your letter is, and keep it to a page. You don't want to be sending a really long, rambling kind of letter. It's like, get to your point, tell your story, and then that's it. Don't feel like longer is not necessarily better, but at the same time, you want to provide enough information about your story to be able to provide that complete picture. So, one page is single spaced, like a cover letter kind of looking thing is kind of what you want to be shooting for. And, this isn't something you can just write and then be like, oh, I'm done. If you, those effective letters, you're going to have to spend some time redrafting them, show it to somebody else who, doesn't know anything about you or doesn't know about what you're doing, and get their response. Are they getting the emotional response? Have you hooked them? Have you got their attention? I mean, that's a really good way to sort of test if your letter is going to be effective, is to show it to somebody else and ask them by the time they get to the end, have you made them feel something? And if the answer is no, then you got to go back to the drawing board.
I agree. You'd be way better off writing 2 letters on 2 separate subjects than an extended letter that just goes on and on and on.
So we have another question. When it comes to shaping state policy, how can we best influence our representatives?
It's a little bit broader than a letter writing campaign. First of all, you got to get the right people elected. You got to get the right people to run for office. You got to get the right people elected. You have to make sure that once they're elected, they know what their constituents think and believe. So it's a little bit broader than just a letter writing program. It's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other questions out there? And I apologize. I have a teething 1-year-old in the background. If you hear a child screaming, I promise she's well attended to.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you might that you have to think about, depending on the issue, is figuring out who to write to. I mean, that is often the biggest challenge. And so is, the U.S., your U.S. senator or your, U.S. House member, is that the right place to go? Or are you better off approaching someone at the state legislative level? Or are you better off trying to work at this at the local level? And, depending on the issue, it could be all of the above, or it could be, oh, no, I know that my state deals with this, so I have to talk to my state representative. So that sometimes is a strategic choice you have, but sometimes it will be determined by the issue that you have. And I know, based on what my students have told me, one of the things that frustrates them is they get letters, from, people asking for help with their, like electric bill, which is not something a U.S. senator can help them with. But most U.S. senators will help refer people to the proper agencies. But if you do a little thinking ahead of time, and making, like I said, sometimes, it might make sense to contact multiple, levels, but depending on the issue, there may, it might be something that is going to be far more effective at the state or local level.
That's great. Another question here. Should we take into account what committees our representatives serve on when writing an issue? Should we craft letters that correspond specifically to their committee assignments?
Is that to me?
Just a general question, sure.
Oh, okay. It's always good to know. I mean, let me give you a couple of different answers to that. One is the vast majority of people that came into our congressional office when I was the chief of staff for a House member, they didn't have any concept of how often the House member had to run for office. They didn't have any concept of as to whether he had ever been in their town or their city or their borough. And in our case, he had the whole of the northeastern portion of the state. So essentially from the Cleveland-Cuyahoga County border out to Pennsylvania, and then almost just north of Youngstown, and then back again. And so they would come in, and they wanted to visit Washington, and they knew they had to come by the Washington office of the member of Congress, and they'd walk in and they'd sign in, and somebody would come find me, and if Dennis was there or I was there, we would come out, or one of us would come out and talk with them and ask them, well, where are you from? And they'd say, oh, we're from this town. And we said, well, did they ever get the fire department fixed there? What do you mean? Well, when we were last there, the fire department had just had a fire, and they were closed, and they were working out of the police offices instead. Well, how do you know that? Well, we work there. I mean, you are our constituents. We come to your town on weekends, on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Whenever we can get out of Washington, we come home and we work there. No, you've never been to our town. Okay, that was the level of the suspension of disbelief, that they didn't believe because we were representing them that we'd ever been to their town. They didn't know how often Dennis had to run. They didn't know how he ran. They didn't know what it took to run. And it was rare that people would come in with any degree of knowledge about what it took to run for office and to stay in office. And if they knew his committees, I would have been floored. Unless they were professional lobbyists or professional advocates, or it was their job to be in contact with us, they had no idea what committees he served on, or anybody else in our delegation. And the delegations all try and cover the waterfront on the committee's assignments. So you always want all of except for Vermont, which has one member of Congress, or Wyoming, which has one member of Congress. They can't cover all the committees. But if you're a multi-member district like Ohio or Pennsylvania or New York or Illinois, you want as many people on as many other committees as you can possibly have, so that you have real representation in all the committees. And then when something comes up in those committees that's important to you, they get together as a delegation, and they talk stuff through. They may disagree politically, but more often than not, if it affects the state and it affects multiple jurisdictions in the state, the members of Congress often work together on those kinds of things.
It's interesting. We've had a lot of conversations lately there's been a lot of talk about kind of trying to bridge this divide post-election and things, and wanting to see more of that, wanting to know those stories, right? That does happen. It's not, this terrible divide in every way.
And the members of Congress often, look, the truth of the matter is there are only so many flights back and forth to Washington, and there are only so many airports. So you run into your colleagues all the time, and you're on the same flights, and you talk, and you may not agree on very much, but you do communicate, and for the most part, each other on a personal basis, and oftentimes, if they've been around for any length of time, they know each other's families. They've served as counselors to the other member of Congress. They work, they're friends in many cases. And in the old days, and that meaning just before COVID, the members of Congress often would travel to various places around the country or around the world together to learn about various things that were going on around the world. And in that, often the spouses came along, and the spouses often break down a lot of the barriers. It's hard to argue, it's hard to fight with someone whose spouse your spouse really likes. So there really is a leveling of that kind of anger at one another. It's not as deep as it appears in media.
Mm. All right, any other questions out there?
I have one question. Is it worth writing a letter to a representative that you know already supports a certain policy that you care about? Or is it more effective to write a letter to someone who, like, that's not on their policy plan?
I'll just give you my personal view on this. I think Barbara and Christy might have slightly different viewpoints on this. I don't think it's a waste of time to tell somebody that you agree with them. For the one thing, if you do agree with them and they know you, that has extra merit to them that they're hearing from somebody that does agree with them. Now, if you're just making it up and you're just saying it because you want them to like you, then they're going to see through that, and you're going to see through that. But if it's really heartfelt and you think they're doing a great job by doing what you're advocating, tell them. Tell them. Absolutely tell them.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. Even if you know that your member agrees with you, they're still looking for, evidence. They want to hear from their constituents even when they agree, because that, provides them with confirmation that they're doing what they want, what they should be doing. And so I think it is really helpful to members that you agree with. And even the members that you don't agree with, you're still letting them know that, you're their constituent too. And to me, the sweet spot is sort of raising attention to an issue or framing an issue in a way that the member or the staff member hasn't thought about before. And, you don't always know that you're going to be able to do that. But, like my example with the bees, that was something that just wasn't on their radar at all. And it wasn't until they started hearing from constituents that they were like, oh, wait a minute, here's a problem that we haven't thought about. Maybe we should address this. And I'm not saying that you should go out and try to figure out what issues are not on your members' agenda, but that's kind of the sweet spot. But I think, regardless of the legislator's position, you can have an impact. It will be in different ways, but it's all still important.
Couldn't agree more. Besides, they're human beings. They just like to know that they're doing the right thing. Every once in a while, just tell them they're doing the right thing.
All right, last call for questions, and then I'll turn it back over to Hunter to wrap us up. I'm watching the time here, so. This is great. And just so you all know, I do apologize. I didn't start recording until Dr. Palmer had started her remarks. But we do have this recorded. So if you want to go back and revisit anything, or if you have a group or a student organization that you'd like to share this with, it'll be available on the Brain Center YouTube channel, and we'll share out to the list of everyone who registered as well. But Hunter, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you if you want to wrap us up here.
Yeah, of course. So we used to send letters out on campus. The BW bookstore actually sells envelopes and stamps, which I wasn't aware of until like last week. And then we have a post office just on Seminary Street where you can drop off letters in like the blue outgoing mailbox. Also, I have a link that I'll put in the chat box. It is really an easy way for you to find your representatives. It breaks it down by state, and you can find their mailing address and their email address and phone number. And yeah, thank you, Jack and Dr. Palmer, for joining us tonight, and everyone who logged on. This means a lot. So yeah.
Thank you for your thank you for all of your efforts to be with us.
I just so apologize for not being able to get on and see you guys. Not that you want to see me, but I'd love to see. I'd love to see you. And then all of the electronics just went down at the same time, and it's still not. I've been trying while I've been talking to you here, and it's still not back up. So. We're gonna have to get our specialist in here to figure this out. Awesome. But thank you all, and don't if you want to have further conversations about this, I'm happy to talk about this. I'm also happy to help you line up internships in the various congressional or state offices if I can be helpful in that, or just kind of advise on staying active. Not politically so much as being active socially in the political process. Now, I don't care whether you're partisan political, but I do care that you continue to pay attention to the congressional offices and the state offices. Pay attention to them. It's really important that you do that.
Thank you. And Jack, I know you can't see the chat box, so I'll just tell you there's a whole lot of thank yous and folks sharing that they've learned a lot this evening. So
that's very sweet. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining, and thanks everyone for logging in. Dr. Palmer, I don't know if you have any concluding remarks or things you want to share before we log off. You're muted, sorry.
I do that all the time, which is probably a good thing in hindsight. But I just want to, build on what Jack said in terms of right now I'm so frustrated because every day, 6 times a day when I check the media, the headline is America so divided, America so divided, America so divided. And I just want to scream, stop saying that. Because by saying it, you make it happen. And I really don't think we are that divided. It's just that the media says that because it's more exciting and it sells, it gets eyeballs. And so I keep telling people it's not as horrible. Yeah, we got problems, but it's not as horrible as you think. And you can have an impact.
Yes. Awesome.
I agree.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for logging in. Everyone, be well, be safe. Absolutely. We look forward to staying connected, and let us know how we can support you.
Bye-bye.
Great job, team.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for logging on, Dr. Palmer.